They thought vandalizing a veteran's classic Mustang in Oak Harbor would be just another act of intimidation for the Storm Raiders MC. Looking at James Miller's quiet suburban home on that crisp Michigan morning, all they saw was an easy target. Another chance to show the lakeside community who really owned these streets. What Axel Reaper Thorne and his gang didn't realize was that James wasn't just any retired Marine. He was a highly trained military intelligence officer who had spent 3 tours uncovering and dismantling insurgent networks across Afghanistan. His modest demeanor concealed a tactical mind that had mapped out some of the military's most successful counterterrorism operations. Now, watching the Storm Raiders circle his prized '67 Mustang, James recognized the familiar patterns of a criminal organization testing its boundaries. He could have let it go. Could have filed an insurance claim like countless other victims of the Storm Raiders' reign of terror across the Great Lakes region. Instead, he chose to dig deeper, a decision that would transform a simple act of vandalism into the catalyst for exposing one of Michigan's largest criminal enterprises. By the time the storm cleared, Axel Reaper Thorne and his gang would learn a brutal lesson about underestimating a quiet veteran, and Oak Harbor would never be the same. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Harbor's waterfront as James Miller stepped onto his front porch. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of lake water and fallen leaves, a peaceful scene that belied the tension brewing in the lakeside community. His restored 1967 Mustang sat in the driveway, its dark blue paint gleaming, a labor of love that had helped him cope with the transition back to civilian life. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left their mark on James, not in the visible scars that many veterans bore, but in the quiet watchfulness that never quite left his eyes. His work in military intelligence had taught him to see patterns where others saw coincidence, to recognize the subtle signs of organized criminal activity that most people overlooked. The rumble started as a distant thunder, growing louder until it filled the quiet morning. James's hand tensed on his coffee mug as 5 motorcycles rounded the corner, their riders wearing the unmistakable patches of the Storm Raiders MC. Their reputation had grown darker over the past year. Businesses burned, people disappeared, and somehow the police never seemed to make any arrests stick. Axel Reaper Thorne dismounted his bike with fluid grace, his leather cut bearing the president's patch of the Storm Raiders. His steel-gray eyes surveyed James's property with calculated interest, lingering on the Mustang. "Nice car, old man," he called out, his voice carrying an edge sharper than his smile. "Shame if something happened to it." James set his coffee down slowly, measuring his response. "I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" Thorne's laugh was hollow. "Just admiring American craftsmanship, unless you've got a problem with that." His men spread out, their boots crunching on fallen leaves. One ran his gloved hand along the Mustang's hood, leaving deliberate smudges on the polished surface. "I've got somewhere to be," James replied evenly, already reaching for his phone. "The Veterans Center opens at 9. "Veterans," Thorne spat the word like it tasted bitter. "Always hiding behind that service card. This ain't the sandbox anymore, jarhead. These streets, they've got different rules." James watched them through the lens of his military training, noting positions, identifying likely weapons beneath leather jackets. His mind was already cataloging details. The distinctive tattoo on one rider's neck, the custom work on their bikes, the way they positioned themselves to control sight lines. "Last warning," Thorne's voice dropped to a growl. "Oak Harbor's changing. Smart folks learn to adapt. Others?" He made a show of examining his heavy rings. "They tend to have accidents." The first crack of metal on metal made James flinch. A chain whipped across his Mustang's hood, leaving a jagged scar in the paint. The others joined in with practiced efficiency. Slashed tires, shattered windows, each blow calculated to cause maximum damage while their leader watched with satisfaction. James stood motionless, his phone recording every second. Where others might have seen senseless destruction, he recognized a tactical display, a show of force meant to intimidate the community. But the Storm Raiders had made a critical error. They'd given him a reason to look closer, to apply his intelligence training to their operation. As the bikers roared away, leaving his cherished Mustang in ruins, James was already thinking several moves ahead. He'd seen enough combat to recognize when he was in a fight, and enough intelligence operations to know that sometimes the best response wasn't immediate retaliation. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number he'd kept from his service days. "This is James Miller." He spoke quietly into the phone. "I need to speak with Agent Victoria Reynolds at the FBI field office. Tell her it's about the Storm Raiders MC and a pattern of organized criminal activity she might want to hear about." Behind him, glass tinkled as pieces of his shattered windshield settled on the driveway. But James's mind was already mapping out connections, piecing together fragments of information he'd gathered over months of quiet observation. The Storm Raiders had just given him the key to their undoing. They just didn't know it yet. The Oak Harbor Veterans Center stood as a modest brick building 3 blocks from the lake, its American flag snapping in the sharp autumn wind. James pulled into the parking lot in his borrowed truck, the image of his vandalized Mustang still fresh in his mind. Inside, he found Tommy Rodriguez already waiting in his office, a manila folder clutched in his trembling hands. "They got to you too, didn't they?" Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper. The younger veteran's face bore the tightness of someone carrying too much weight for too long. "My sister's restaurant. They came again last night. Said the protection money's doubling." James closed the office door, his military training kicking in as he scanned for listening devices, a habit that had saved lives overseas. "Tell me everything, Tommy. Times, faces, anything you remember." "It's not just the restaurant anymore, James." Tommy spread photos across the desk, shots taken from his phone showing Storm Raiders members unloading crates at the marina after midnight. "They're using the lake, moving something big through my sister's place. When she threatened to call the cops..." He trailed off, hands shaking. "That's when they showed up at your house," James finished, studying the photos. His intelligence training highlighted details others might miss: serial numbers on crates, reflection of a license plate in a window, the distinctive skull tattoo on one rider's neck matching one of his attackers from that morning. The door opened and Mike Chen, another regular at the center, stepped in. The former Army medic's usual easy smile was replaced by a grim expression. "You're looking into them, aren't you? The Storm Raiders?" He closed the door quietly. "My cousin works at the hospital. 3 ODs last week. New synthetic stuff nobody's seen before. All traced back to spots where those bikes were seen." James pinned the photos to his office wall, connecting threads in his mind. "The lake gives them access to Canada," he mused. "Ports without customs, small boats that don't draw attention. They're not just some gang anymore." "They've got people everywhere," Tommy added. "Cops look the other way. Business owners won't talk. Even the local news killed a story about them last month." A sharp knock interrupted them. Agent Victoria Reynolds stood in the doorway, her FBI badge catching the fluorescent light. "Mr. Miller? Got your message? Mind telling me why a decorated Marine intelligence officer is suddenly interested in a local motorcycle club?" James gestured to the photos. "Because they're not just a club anymore. They're an organization. The vandalism, the extortion, it's all coverage for something bigger. The Storm Raiders are using Oak Harbor's waterfront as a pipeline." Reynolds studied the wall of photos, her trained eye picking up the same patterns James had seen. "We've been watching them," she admitted. "But we can't get anyone on the inside. People are too scared to talk. Or too bought off," Mike added bitterly. "Then we build it piece by piece," James said, his voice taking on the quiet authority that had guided intelligence operations through war zones. "Every business they threaten, every shipment they move, every corrupt official they pay off, it all leaves traces. We just need to connect them." Reynolds turned to him, measuring his words. "You're talking about running an intelligence operation on American soil." "I'm talking about protecting my community," James corrected. "The Storm Raiders think they can terrorize people because nobody fights back. But they made a mistake this morning. They showed me their playbook. Now we use it against them." Tommy straightened in his chair, some of his old military bearing returning. "Whatever you need, James. My sister's place, the marina, we can watch them." "It's dangerous," Reynolds warned. "These people aren't just thugs. Axel Thorne's got connections. The last person who tried to investigate them disappeared." "Then we do it right," James replied, his mind already formulating plans. "We build a network. Veterans, business owners, people they've hurt, everyone who's tired of living under their shadow. We gather intel, document everything, build a case they can't bury." Mike nodded slowly. "Just like old times. Except instead of tracking insurgents, we're tracking Americans who've forgotten what that means," James finished. He turned to Reynolds. "The Storm Raiders think they own these streets. It's time to show them they're wrong." Reynolds studied the wall one more time, then pulled out her card. "Off the books," she said quietly. "Whatever you find comes directly to me. If they're really moving product through the lake." "They are," James assured her. "And by the time we're done, we'll have enough evidence to tear their whole operation apart." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the others left his office, James stayed behind, staring at the photos. Somewhere in Oak Harbor, Axel Thorne probably thought he'd won today, teaching another citizen to keep quiet and look away. Instead, he just started a war he didn't even know was coming. James's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A photo of his vandalized Mustang, followed by words that made his jaw tighten. "Just the beginning, hero. Smart folks learn to adapt." He deleted the message, his resolve hardening. The Storm Raiders had chosen this fight, thinking they were dealing with a simple veteran who'd break under pressure. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The waterfront grew eerie as dusk settled over Oak Harbor, fishing boats returning to their slips while darker vessels waited for deeper night. James sat in his borrowed truck, camera ready, watching the Storm Raiders' preferred marina through military-grade binoculars. 3 nights of surveillance had revealed a pattern, one he recognized from tracking insurgent supply lines in Afghanistan. "Movement at your 2 o'clock, Tommy's voice crackled through the secure radio agent Reynolds had provided. He was positioned at his sister's restaurant 2 blocks away, using the prep work as cover for his own surveillance. 4 bikes, looks like Thorne's leading. James adjusted his focus, noting how the Storm Raiders' formation screened their leader from street view. Professional, disciplined. These weren't ordinary bikers playing at being outlaws. Their operation showed military precision, which meant someone with training was involved. "They're heading to Dock 7, James murmured into his radio. "Same slip as Monday night." He photographed each bike, capturing license plates and rider descriptions. One caught his attention. A new face, wearing patches that marked him as former military. The pieces started clicking together in James's mind. His phone vibrated. A message from Reynolds. "Got movement at the border. Canadian contacts reporting increased traffic through unofficial channels. Whatever's coming, it's happening soon." The Storm Raiders gathered at the dock, their bikes forming a screen from curious eyes. But they hadn't counted on James's position or his experience in choosing observation posts. Through his lens, he watched an unmarked boat approach, running dark. The way it handled the waves spoke of professional seamanship, not amateur smugglers. "Got visitors at the restaurant." Tommy's voice was tense. 2 guys I've never seen before. Expensive suits, trying too hard to look like tourists. "Get photos if you can," James replied. "And Tommy, keep your sister away from them." The boat docked smoothly, its crew moving with practiced efficiency. James documented everything: faces, crates, the subtle hand signals between crew and bikers. But something felt wrong. The Storm Raiders were too exposed, too visible for a major shipment. His instincts screamed a warning just as headlights flooded the marina parking lot. 3 black SUVs rolled in, and James's blood ran cold as he recognized the driver of the lead vehicle, Officer Parker from Oak Harbor PD, supposedly one of the good ones. "We've got police involvement," James reported quietly. "Not the kind we want." Through his binoculars, he watched the dangerous dance unfold. Money changed hands, Papers were signed, and the crates disappeared into the SUVs while the storm raiders provided security. It wasn't just smuggling. It was a coordinated operation with official protection. "James," Tommy's voice carried new urgency. "The suits just got a call. They're leaving, but they looked happy. Too happy." A chill ran through James as the pieces aligned. This isn't the shipment, he realized. It's a show. They're proving they can move product, proving they've got the police in their pocket. He started his truck, keeping the lights off. They're setting up something bigger. He was about to pull away when a familiar bike roared past his position. Thorne, riding alone. The storm raiders' leader stopped at the end of the dock, making a call. James adjusted his camera, using the low light settings to capture the moment. Through the lens, he read Thorne's lips as he spoke. "It's done. They're convinced. Tell the boss we're ready for the real shipment." James transmitted the photos to Reynolds, his mind racing. The storm raiders weren't just criminals. They were auditioners, proving their worth to someone bigger, someone who could afford to buy police protection and arrange international smuggling routes. His phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "Enjoying the show, hero? Some things are better left unwatched." They knew he was investigating. The question was, why weren't they stopping him? The answer hit him as he drove home, taking a circuitous route to check for tails. They wanted him watching, wanted him focused on the marina, on the obvious criminal activity, which meant the real operation, the true threat, was happening somewhere else. At home, James added the night's photos to his growing wall of evidence. Connections formed, shipping routes, corrupted officials, front businesses. But something was missing, something that nagged at his intelligence officer's instincts. He stared at Thorne's image, at the calculated way the storm raiders' leader had staged the entire evening. This wasn't just about drugs or money. Oak Harbor's strategic location, the border access, the police corruption, it was all preparation for something worse. His phone lit up with a text from Reynolds. "We need to meet. First light, bring everything you've got." James sent back a confirmation, then turned off the lights. In the darkness, he could almost hear the puzzle pieces shifting, forming a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. The storm raiders weren't the enemy. They were just the advance guard. And somewhere in Oak Harbor, the real threat was taking root while everyone watched the bikers. First light found James and Agent Reynolds at an abandoned lighthouse north of town, waves crashing against the rocks below. The isolation made it perfect for sensitive meetings. No cameras, no witnesses, no chance of corrupt police driving past. "It's bigger than we thought," Reynolds said, spreading surveillance photos across the hood of her car. "Your marina operation exposed something. Canadian intelligence flagged similar patterns in 3 other border towns. All of them have motorcycle clubs that suddenly turned professional. All of them have compromised law enforcement." James studied the photos, his trained eye picking out details. "They're building a pipeline," he said quietly. "The storm raiders, the police payoffs, it's infrastructure. But for what?" "That's the question that got my superior's attention." Reynolds pulled out another file. "Meet Marcus Webb, former Special Forces, dishonorably discharged after an operation went bad in Syria. He's been spotted meeting with Thorne 3 times this month." The photo showed a hard-faced man with military bearing talking to the storm raiders' leader. James felt a chill of recognition. "I know him. Not personally, but I know the type. We used to track operators who went private, selling their skills to the highest bidder." "Webb's got a particular specialty," Reynolds added grimly. "He trains criminal organizations in military tactics, turns thugs into soldiers." Before James could respond, the rumble of motorcycles echoed off the cliffs. 3 bikes appeared on the access road, storm raiders' patches visible in the morning sun. Reynolds reached for her sidearm, but James caught her wrist. "Wait," he warned. "They're not here for a fight. Not yet." Axel Thorne dismounted first, removing his helmet with theatrical slowness. "Well, isn't this cozy?" The hero and the Fed, sharing secrets at sunrise. His voice carried across the parking lot, almost friendly if not for the steel beneath it. "Private property?" Reynolds called out. "Federal investigation in progress." Thorne's laugh was genuine. "Nothing's private anymore, Agent Reynolds. Nothing's really federal either, is it? Not in towns like Oak Harbor." He approached slowly, hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Just having a friendly conversation with our local veteran here, about boundaries." James stepped forward, placing himself between Reynolds and the bikers. "Boundaries like the marina? Like the police you're paying off?" "Smart man," Thorne nodded approvingly. "Sees the pieces, puts them together. But you're looking at the puzzle all wrong, James. You think this is about drugs, about money. It's so much bigger than that." "The military contractor?" James pressed. "Webb, what's he training your people for?" Something dark flashed in Thorne's eyes. Asking the right questions now. But here's a better one. Why are we letting you ask them? He pulled out his phone, showing a clear photo of James conducting surveillance at the marina. "You think we didn't know? That we couldn't have stopped you any time?" Reynolds shifted her weight, ready to move. "Is that a threat?" "An invitation," Thorne corrected. "Smart folks learn to adapt, remember? Well, some smart folks are adapting to a new reality. One where the old rules, the old loyalties, don't mean much anymore." He focused on James. "You served your country. Now your country's changing. Question is, which side of that change do you want to be on?" James felt the weight of his phone in his pocket, still recording. "You're recruiting. The shows of force, the corruption, it's all a demonstration for someone bigger. Give the man a prize." Thorne smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Last chance to be reasonable. A man with your skills, your experience, you could be valuable. Instead of playing cop in a world where cops don't matter anymore." "And if I refuse?" Thorne's expression hardened. "Then you'll get to watch everything you fought for burn. Starting with that Veterans Center you care so much about." He turned to leave, then paused. "One day. Think it over. After that, well, boundaries have consequences." The bikers roared away, leaving James and Reynolds in a cloud of dust. She immediately pulled out her phone, calling for backup, but James barely heard her. His mind was racing, connecting new dots. They're building an army, he realized. The Storm Raiders, the other clubs. They're not just criminals anymore. They're a private military force. Reynolds lowered her phone. "For who?" "Someone who thinks the country's changing." James quoted Thorne's words. "Someone who wants to control that change." He turned to her. "We need to move fast. They just told us their timeline." "One day." Reynolds nodded. "What are you thinking?" James stared at the horizon, where the Storm Raiders had disappeared. "I'm thinking it's time to show them what a real military operation looks like." Behind them, the lighthouse cast its shadow across the parking lot, like a line being drawn between past and future. In 24 hours, Oak Harbor would become a battlefield, one that would determine the fate of not just a town, but possibly the entire region. And James had no intention of watching anything burn. The Veterans Center buzzed with quiet intensity as James transformed the main meeting room into an operations center. Photos and maps covered the walls, string connecting key locations across Oak Harbor. Tommy and Mike worked phones, reaching out to trusted contacts while other veterans filtered in, drawn by the urgency in James's message. "Webb's been busy," Reynolds announced, entering with a fresh stack of intelligence reports. Similar motorcycle club transformations in 12 cities across the Great Lakes region. All border towns, all with deep water access. James studied the marina photos, his military training highlighting the patterns others might miss. They're not just taking over the clubs, they're positioning assets. Each town gives them a potential entry point, a base of operations with built-in deniability. "But for what?" Tommy asked, marking another location on the map. "What needs this much infrastructure?" Before James could answer, Mike burst through the door. "We've got movement. Large shipment just cleared customs at the northern marina, marked as farming equipment. But my contact says the paperwork's wrong. Serial numbers don't match any known manufacturer. James's mind flashed to similar shipments he'd tracked overseas. Weapons, he said grimly. Broken down, disguised as machinery parts. Classic insurgency tactic. We saw it in Afghanistan all the time. Reynolds stepped closer to the map. The Storm Raiders aren't just providing security anymore. They're setting up distribution networks, training with military contractors. They're building cells, James finished. Semi-independent units that can operate without central control. If one gets compromised, the others survive. Reynolds nodded. Professional methodology. The door opened again, admitting an older veteran James recognized from his father's generation. Richard Knox, former Navy SEAL, now harbor master at Oak Harbor's main port. Got something you need to see, he said, spreading out cargo manifests. Last 3 months, we've had a 300% increase in private vessels claiming mechanical trouble, requiring emergency docking. James leaned over the papers. Let me guess, they all dock at night. All request minimal customs presence due to sensitive cargo. Knox nodded grimly. And they're getting help from inside. Port Authority, Customs, local PD. Someone's making sure these ships get priority clearance. The pieces clicked together in James's mind. It's not just about bringing things in, he realized. They're testing the system, finding weak points, compromising officials, building infrastructure for something bigger. James, Tommy called from his monitoring station. Chatter on the police scanner. Storm Raiders are mobilizing. Full crew, heading toward the industrial district. Reynolds checked her watch. 12 hours left on Thorne's deadline. This has to be connected. James studied the map, his intelligence training kicking into high gear. The industrial district, the marina activity, Webb's presence. They're not waiting, he said suddenly. The deadline wasn't about me. It was a countdown. Whatever they're planning, it starts tonight. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Then Knox spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of experience. So what's the play, son? We're looking at corrupted law enforcement, trained militants, and an unknown number of compromised officials. James turned to face the room full of veterans. Men and women who'd served across different eras, different conflicts, but all sharing the same core values. We do what we're trained to do. We gather intelligence, we identify threats, and we neutralize them. He moved to the map, marking key positions. Mike, get your hospital contacts on alert. Whatever's coming, we need medical support ready. Tommy, your sister's restaurant overlooks their main route. We need eyes there. Knox, I need manifests for every ship scheduled to dock tonight. Reynolds stepped forward. I can have a tactical team ready in 2 hours, but without concrete evidence. We'll get it, James assured her, because they're going to show us everything. He pointed to the marina. They think they've got us watching the obvious moves, the bikes, the smuggling, but we're going to track every ship, every vehicle, every phone call. By morning, we'll have enough evidence to take down not just the Storm Raiders, but their entire network. And if they spot us? Tommy asked. James's expression hardened. They're expecting a few amateur observers. What they're getting is a coordinated military intelligence operation run by combat veterans who've done this in actual war zones. We're not just gathering evidence. We're taking back our town. The room filled with quiet murmurs of agreement. These were people who'd sworn oaths to protect their country, who'd faced worse odds in worse places. Now they had a chance to make a difference in their own backyard. One more thing, James added, his voice carrying across the room. Whatever they're bringing in tonight, whoever they're working for, they picked Oak Harbor because they thought it was weak. Thought we'd look the other way. Time to show them how wrong they were. As the veterans moved to their assigned positions, Reynolds caught James's arm. You know this is bigger than just Oak Harbor, right? If Webb's really building a private army, then we'll handle that too, James assured her, one battle at a time. Outside, the sun began to set over Lake Michigan, casting long shadows across Oak Harbor. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, Axel Reaper Thorne was preparing to launch his operation, confident that he'd intimidated the town into submission. He was about to learn a hard lesson about underestimating veterans who'd sworn to protect their home. Night settled over Oak Harbor like a heavy blanket, broken only by the rhythmic sweep of the lighthouse beam. James watched from his observation post atop the old cannery building as storm raiders' bikes began moving in coordinated patterns through the streets below. Not their usual chaotic roaming, this was a deliberate grid search. "They're clearing sectors," he murmured into his radio, recognizing military-style sweep and clear tactics. "Webb's training showing through, Tommy. Status?" "4 suits just entered the restaurant." Tommy's voice crackled through the secure channel. "Not locals. They're carrying. My sister's keeping them busy with the dinner special, but they're watching the marina entrance." James shifted his position, focusing his high-powered lens on a convoy of trucks entering the industrial district. No markings, heavy suspension indicating serious cargo. His military training flagged a dozen subtle details. Drivers wearing tactical gear poorly concealed under civilian clothes, communication antenna disguised as CB radio whips. "Got eyes on Webb," Mike's voice cut in. "He's at the secondary port with some kind of technical team. They're setting up equipment in that abandoned warehouse. Looks like communications gear." Reynolds, monitoring from her unmarked car, added her own update. "Border Patrol just reported 3 boats going dark after entering U.S. waters. They're running silent toward Oak Harbor." James documented everything, his mind assembling the puzzle pieces. The storm raiders weren't just providing muscle anymore. They were coordinating a full-scale covert operation. The bikes, the trucks, the boats. They were establishing a control grid over the entire town. "Knox, what's the word from the harbor master's office?" "Just got interesting," the older veteran replied. "They're shutting down regular port operations early, citing mechanical issues with the main cargo crane. Never happened in 15 years. A flash of movement caught James's attention. 2 storm raiders were setting up observation posts of their own, watching the police station, not threatening it, monitoring it. They're not just watching for law enforcement, James realized. They're making sure their paid-off cops stay bought. He adjusted his camera, capturing faces and positions. "Reynolds, how many officers are actually clean?" "Maybe half," she replied grimly. "And those are being kept busy with false calls across town." The pieces suddenly aligned in James's mind. "It's not an invasion," he said quietly. "It's an infiltration. They're not trying to take the town by force. They're setting up a shadow infrastructure. Ports, police, transportation. They're building their own parallel system." As if confirming his theory, a new group of vehicles entered the area. Commercial vans marked with legitimate local business logos. But James's trained eye caught the metal reinforcement behind the normal sheet metal, the subtle bulk of hidden armor. "They're going to run the town like a forward operating base," he continued. "Legal business up front, completely different operation behind the scenes. Classic insurgency tactic." "James." Tommy's voice carried new urgency. "The suits just got a call. They're moving to the back room." "Wait." A pause, then. "I can hear them. They're talking about activation protocols and something called Phase 1 contingencies." Reynolds cut in. "Multiple reports of power fluctuations across the grid. Someone's testing the system." James's mind raced. Power grid testing, communications equipment, parallel infrastructure. "This isn't just about smuggling," he said. "They're preparing for something bigger, something that needs total control of a border town's infrastructure." A new sound cut through the night. Helicopters, running dark, approaching from the lake. James tracked them through his night vision scope, noting their flight pattern. Not law enforcement, not medical. These were military-grade transport choppers, flying too low for regular radar. "Reynolds, we need to move faster," he urged. "Whatever they're bringing in tonight, it's just the beginning. Once they have their infrastructure in place, they can move anything through here," she finished. "Or anyone." Before James could respond, his phone lit up with a message. A photo of the Veterans Center taken minutes ago, showing 2 storm raiders watching the building. The text below it was simple. "Ready to adapt yet?" James switched channels on his radio. "All units be advised. They're watching the center. Maintain observation protocols, but do not, repeat, not approach the building." He kept his position as more vehicles moved into the industrial district, as boats docked silently in the night, as Webb's technical team established their command center. Each piece of the operation exposed another layer of the storm raiders' true purpose. They weren't just taking over Oak Harbor. They were turning it into something else entirely. A gateway for whatever organization had hired Webb, bought the police, and transformed a motorcycle gang into a private military force. And they still had no idea they were being watched by veterans who'd spent years tracking exactly these kinds of operations in war zones around the world. "Keep recording," James instructed his team. "Document everything. In a few hours, they're going to show us exactly what all this preparation is for." In the distance, more helicopters approached, their dark shapes barely visible against the night sky. The real operation was about to begin. The first sign that something was wrong came at exactly 2:47 a.m. The power grid across Oak Harbor's industrial district flickered once, then stabilized at exactly 80% capacity. To most observers, it would have seemed like a routine brownout, but James recognized it for what it was: a deliberate power adjustment to avoid overloading the grid with whatever equipment Webb's team was activating. "All stations, radio check," James whispered into his comm unit. "Report any changes." Tommy's voice came first. "2 more technical teams just arrived at the warehouse. They're unloading some kind of satellite equipment. Military grade, definitely not civilian." "Knox here," the harbor master added. 3 more boats just requested emergency docking. But here's the thing. They're requesting specific berths, numbers that give them direct access to the town's main power junction boxes. Mike's transmission crackled with tension. "Movement at the hospital. Storm raiders are positioning bikes at all emergency entrances. They're not blocking them, just watching." James adjusted his position on the cannery roof, documenting everything through his camera. The pattern was clear now. The storm raiders were establishing control points at every critical infrastructure node in town. Power, communications, medical facilities, transportation routes. Classic first-stage takeover protocols. Suddenly, his radio came alive with Reynolds' urgent voice. "James, we've got trouble. Webb's team just accessed the town's emergency broadcast system. They've got control of all local communications." As if on cue, every digital billboard in the industrial district went dark. Cellular signals became spotty, then died completely. In the distance, the port's main communications array stopped its regular blinking pattern. "They're isolating the town," James realized, "creating an information blackout." He switched channels. "All units switch to backup frequencies. Maintain radio discipline." Through his scope, James watched as more unmarked vehicles converged on the warehouse district. These weren't just trucks anymore. They were mobile command units disguised as commercial vehicles. Each one carried sophisticated electronic warfare equipment, the kind he'd seen used to control battle space in combat zones. "James," Tommy's voice was barely a whisper now. "The suits in the restaurant just got some kind of signal. They're moving out, but they're all wearing the same kind of earpieces I saw in Special Forces." "Private military contractors," James confirmed. "Professional ones. The storm raiders are just the visible muscle. These are the real operators." A new sound cut through the night. The deep thrum of larger helicopters approaching from the lake. But these weren't the transport choppers from earlier. These were attack variants, running dark, using the lake's background noise to mask their approach. "Reynolds," James called quietly. "Tell me you're seeing this." "Affirmative," she replied. "But there's more. Just got word from the Bureau. Similar communications blackouts are being reported in 3 other border towns, all places where Webb's been active." James's mind raced. The scale of the operation was staggering. They weren't just taking over Oak Harbor, they were establishing multiple forward operating bases simultaneously. But for what? His answer came moments later. as the attack helicopters reached their holding pattern over the industrial district. Red laser dots began appearing on strategic buildings, targeting designators, mapping out firing solutions, not to destroy, but to demonstrate capability. "This isn't an infiltration anymore," James transmitted to his team. "This is a show of force. They're letting us see their capabilities." As if confirming his assessment, Axel Thorne's voice boomed through the emergency broadcast system, now under their control. "Attention Oak Harbor. This is a notification of transfer of municipal authority. For your safety, remain in your homes. Any interference with ongoing security operations will be met with appropriate force." James watched as Storm Raiders' bikes began moving in formation through the streets, enforcing the lockdown. But his trained eye caught something else. Beneath their leather cuts, they were now wearing military-grade tactical gear. The transformation was complete. "They're not even pretending anymore," Reynolds observed. "This is a straight military takeover." "No," James corrected, his voice grim. "This is just the rehearsal. They're practicing for something bigger." He focused his camera on Webb, now emerging from the command center. "The real target isn't Oak Harbor. They're using us to prove they can take and hold strategic positions along the border." Tommy's voice cut in urgently. "James, multiple vehicles approaching the Veterans Center, Storm Raiders and some kind of tactical team." James's jaw tightened. "They're moving on our base of operations. They have to suspect we're watching." He switched to the main channel. "All units, initiate contingency plan Delta. Fall back to secondary positions." But as his team acknowledged the order, James stayed in position, watching the operation unfold. Because something wasn't adding up. The helicopters, the tactical teams, the communications blackout. It was all too visible, too obvious. "They want us to see this," he realized. "They want us focused on the military show of force, which means the real operation is happening somewhere else," Reynolds finished. "While we're watching this..." James swung his scope toward the lake, where the night was about to reveal its darkest secrets yet. James's instincts proved right. While attack helicopters held their threatening pattern over Oak Harbor's industrial district, something far more sinister was happening at the darkened marina. Through his tactical scope, he watched as unmarked submarines surfaced silently in the deep water channel. Sleek, military-grade vessels that shouldn't exist in civilian waters. "Reynolds," he whispered into his comm. "Please tell me you're recording this." "Affirmative." Her voice was tight. "But it gets worse. Those aren't just any subs. They're showing up as ghost signals on my equipment. Same tech pattern we've tracked being stolen from naval research facilities." The pieces suddenly clicked together in James's mind. The Storm Raiders' theatrical takeover, Webb's military-style operation. It was all an elaborate distraction. The real mission was happening underwater, where no one would think to look. "Knox," James called quietly. "What's directly beneath your harbor master's station?" A pause, then, "Main data trunk for the entire Great Lakes shipping network. Every vessel tracking system, every cargo manifest, every port security protocol. It all runs through here." That's their real target, James realized. They're not trying to control the town. They're after the shipping network. With access to that, they could move anything through the Great Lakes without detection, Reynolds finished, or make entire shipments disappear from the system. Before James could respond, Tommy's urgent voice cut in. "Multiple Storm Raiders approaching my position. They're sweeping buildings systematically. They know we're watching." "Hold position," James ordered. "Let them pass. We need..." His instructions were cut short by a new sound, the distinctive whir of drone rotors. Small, commercial-grade drones equipped with thermal cameras began methodically scanning the area. Webb was deploying counter-surveillance measures. "All units go dark," James commanded. "Activate thermal blankets." The veterans had prepared for this, using military techniques to mask their heat signatures. But they couldn't hide forever. Suddenly, Mike's voice crackled through. "James, you need to see this. Pulling up hospital security feeds now." The images that appeared on James's secure tablet made his blood run cold. The Storm Raiders weren't just watching the hospital. They were escorting teams of technicians to specific wards. The teams were installing something in the hospital's computer systems. "They're compromising everything," James muttered. Shipping data, medical records, emergency services. They're building a complete shadow infrastructure. Reynolds' voice carried new urgency. James, Bureau just confirmed. Similar submarine signatures detected near 2 other Great Lakes ports. This is coordinated. The full scope of the operation became clear. Oak Harbor wasn't just a target. It was a test case. If they could take control here, they could replicate the operation across the entire Great Lakes region. But James had seen enough. Initiate Vector 3, he commanded. His team acknowledged with clicks. They'd planned for this. While the Storm Raiders hunted for observers, James's veterans had been placing their own surprises throughout the town. The first sign that the counter-operation was working came from the marina. Emergency floodlights suddenly activated, bathing the submarines in unwanted illumination. Simultaneously, every fire alarm in the industrial district triggered, forcing Webb's teams to deal with responding emergency vehicles. Security protocols initiated, Knox reported with satisfaction. Harbor Master systems locked down. They can breach them, but it'll take time. Police band is lighting up, Reynolds added. Your false alarms are drawing in outside departments. Storm Raiders can't stop them all without revealing their true capabilities. James allowed himself a grim smile. The veterans hadn't just been observing. They'd been preparing a multi-layered response drawn from years of military experience. But their victory was short-lived. A new voice cut through their secure channel. Axel Thorne himself. Impressive, James. The Storm Raiders leader sounded almost amused. Military precision. Almost like you knew what to look for. A pause. But here's the thing about veterans. You're predictable. You fight the last war, while you're busy disrupting what you can see. Suddenly, every computer system in Oak Harbor flickered. Bank accounts, traffic systems, utility controls, all displayed the same message. System accessed. Welcome to the new war, Thorne continued. One you don't even know you're fighting yet. James watched as the submarines slipped back beneath the surface, their mission apparently complete. Whatever they'd done to the underwater data networks was already finished. All units fall back to Rally Point Echo, James ordered. They've gotten what they came for. Now we find out what it is. As his team acknowledged, James took one last photo of the scene. The Storm Raiders had revealed their true nature, not just criminals, but soldiers in a new kind of conflict. One fought with data instead of bullets, with system access instead of territory. The question was, who were they really working for? And what was Oak Harbor really being prepared for? The answers, James suspected, would prove far more dangerous than anything they'd seen tonight. Rally Point Echo was an abandoned cold storage facility 3 miles inland, a fallback position James had selected for its natural electronic shielding and multiple escape routes. As his team regrouped, their tactical displays painted a disturbing picture of what had just happened in Oak Harbor. They hit 67 different systems simultaneously, Mike reported, scrolling through data on his hardened laptop. Banking, utilities, transportation, medical records, everything's been compromised at the root level. But they didn't shut anything down, Tommy added, confusion clear in his voice. They just tagged it, like they're marking territory. James studied the facility's old blueprints, now covered with tactical annotations. Because this isn't about control, it's about access. They're building back doors into everything. Reynolds burst through the door, her usually composed demeanor shaken. It's worse than that. Just got word from the Bureau's cyber division. The submarine tech we spotted, it's designed to tap into underwater data cables. They can intercept and manipulate any information flowing through the Great Lakes region. And with the Storm Raiders providing muscle, no one looks too closely at mysterious network issues, Knox concluded grimly. James was about to respond when every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. A message from an unknown number displayed a photo of James's vandalized Mustang, followed by coordinates and 2 words, "Your move." "It's an invitation," James said quietly. "Thorne wants to talk." "It's a trap," Reynolds countered immediately. "Of course it is," James agreed. But they've shown us their operational capabilities. Now they want us to understand why. He turned to his team. Continue monitoring all systems. Document every anomaly, every irregularity. Whatever they're planning, the evidence is in the data. James, Mike called out suddenly. Hospital records showing something strange. Last week they admitted 3 patients with identical symptoms, all filed under different names, but the biometric data matches known Storm Raiders members. Tommy leaned over to look. What kind of symptoms? Radiation exposure, Mike replied grimly. Low level, but consistent with handling nuclear material, James finished. The pieces started falling into place. The shipping network access, the medical records, the infrastructure control. They're not just building a smuggling route. They're building a failsafe, Reynolds realized. A way to move sensitive materials without detection, treat any accidents off the books, and maintain total control over any evidence. Before they could process the implications, Knox's radio crackled. Multiple Storm Raiders moving on the Port Authority building. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. James made his decision. Reynolds, get your cyber team working on those hospital records. Tommy, Mike, start evacuating our backup data to secure locations. Knox, maintain observation of the port but do not engage. What about you? Reynolds demanded. James checked his tactical gear. I'm going to meet Thorne. That's exactly what they want, she protested. No, James corrected. They want us focused on the technology, the infrastructure, the big picture. But something's been bothering me since this started. Why vandalize my car? Why make it personal? He loaded a secure flash drive with their gathered intelligence. They wanted my attention specifically. Time to find out why. The coordinates led to an abandoned grain elevator overlooking the harbor. As James approached carefully, he noted multiple escape routes, possible sniper positions, likely ambush points. His military training cataloged threats automatically. Axel Reaper Thorne waited at the top, alone except for 2 guards. The Storm Raiders leader looked different now, more soldier than biker, his leather cut replaced with tactical gear. Figured it out yet? Thorne called out as James emerged from the stairwell. Why we chose you? Because I'm not just a veteran, James replied, keeping his distance. I'm military intelligence. You wanted someone who could see the pattern. Thorne smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Close. We needed someone who could appreciate the scale of what's happening. The old world's dying, James. Borders, nations, laws, they're all becoming obsolete. What matters now is control of information, of infrastructure. And the nuclear material, James pressed. That part of the new world too? Something flickered in Thorne's eyes. Surprise, quickly masked. Clever, but you're still thinking too small. This isn't about weapons or drugs or any of the usual things. He gestured at the harbor below. This is about building a new system inside the old one, and we're offering you a chance to help shape it. By betraying everything I swore to protect? By accepting reality, Thorne countered. The same governments you served so faithfully, they're already obsolete. They just don't know it yet. What we're building here, it's the future. James took a step forward. You're building a cancer, corrupting everything that makes civilization work. We're building inevitability, Thorne corrected. And after tonight's demonstration, our employers are very pleased with the results. He turned to leave. Think about it, James. You've seen what we can do. Which side of history do you want to be on? As Thorne disappeared into the shadows, James's phone buzzed one final time. A new message showed every traffic camera in Oak Harbor simultaneously turning to focus on the Veterans Center. The implied threat was clear. They could see everything, control everything, destroy anything. But as James descended from the grain elevator, his mind was already formulating a counter-strategy. Because Thorne had made a crucial mistake, he'd revealed that they had employers, people powerful enough to orchestrate this technological takeover, and James had recorded every word. The Veterans Center parking lot was empty when James returned, but his trained eye caught the signs of recent surveillance. cigarette butts from Storm Raiders' stakeout positions, disturbed gravel where their bikes had waited. They wanted him to see they'd been watching. Inside, Reynolds was waiting with Mike and Tommy, their faces illuminated by laptop screens displaying a maze of data streams. The information they'd gathered was starting to tell a story, one that went far beyond Oak Harbor. "You're not going to believe this," Mike said without looking up. "Those hospital records, they connect to similar cases in 12 different cities, all border towns, all with compromised infrastructure, and all with recently militarized motorcycle clubs," Tommy added. "The Storm Raiders aren't unique. They're a prototype." Reynolds spread satellite photos across the table. "Bureau's been tracking similar submarine signatures across the Great Lakes, always near major data trunk lines, always followed by mysterious system upgrades in nearby cities." James played them the recording of his conversation with Thorne. The Storm Raiders leader's words about employers and inevitability took on new meaning in light of what they'd discovered. "They're not just taking over cities," James said quietly. "They're building a parallel infrastructure. Banking, shipping, medical records. Everything a shadow government would need." "But who has that kind of resources?" Tommy wondered. "Who could coordinate something this big?" Before anyone could answer, every computer in the room flickered. Screens filled with scrolling data as their secured systems were breached with impossible ease. A voice emerged from the speakers. Not Thorne's, but someone new. Cultured, confident, almost amused. "Impressive work, Mr. Miller," the voice said. "Most people only see the surface operation. But then, most people didn't spend 3 tours mapping insurgent networks in Afghanistan." James's mind raced. "You've been watching me since before the vandalism. This whole thing, you wanted me to investigate." "We needed to evaluate your capabilities," the voice confirmed. "The Storm Raiders provided a convenient test. Their transformation from common thugs to professional operators demonstrated our ability to repurpose existing criminal networks. Your response demonstrated your potential value." "Value for what?" "The future, Mr. Miller. One where traditional power structures become obsolete. We're building something new, something inevitable. The only question is whether you'll help shape it or be swept aside by it." Reynolds moved to trace the signal, but James stopped her. They were dealing with someone who could breach military-grade encryption like it was tissue paper. "Why show your hand now?" James pressed. "Why reveal yourself?" "Because in 6 hours, we demonstrate Phase 2. Oak Harbor was a proof of concept. Now we show what we can really do." The voice carried a hint of pride. "When every port on the Great Lakes simultaneously experiences technical difficulties, when every shipping manifest becomes unreliable, when no one can trust any information system, that's when people will understand. The old world of borders and nations is ending. We're offering you a chance to help build what comes next." The screens went dark. In the silence that followed, James's team looked to him for direction. "They're going to trigger a cascading infrastructure failure," he realized. "Use their back doors to create chaos, then offer their shadow systems as the solution." "We need to warn people," Tommy started, but James cut him off. "That's exactly what they want. Panic, confusion, a breakdown of trust in existing systems. Instead," he moved to the map, his military training kicking in, "we use their own strategy against them." "How?" Reynolds demanded. "They've spent months building their shadow infrastructure, compromising everything from traffic lights to hospital records, but they had to connect it all to make it work." James's eyes tracked across the map, seeing patterns others might miss. Every backdoor they created, every system they compromised, they're all nodes in their network, and networks can be traced. "Even if we can track it," Mike pointed out. "They've got military contractors, corrupted officials, armed bikers. They've got infrastructure," James corrected. "We've got veterans, people who've actually fought in the shadows they're trying to hide in." He turned to his team. "They think technology makes them untouchable. Time to show them why the human element still matters." The room filled with quiet determination as James outlined his plan. The mysterious voice had revealed more than intended, not just their capabilities, but their timeline. 6 hours to stop a technological apocalypse. And somewhere in Oak Harbor, Axel Reaper Thorne and his Storm Raiders were about to learn the difference between playing soldier and facing real warriors. The plan came together with military precision. While the Storm Raiders patrolled Oak Harbor's streets, James's team began executing a strategy born from decades of combined combat experience. They weren't fighting for territory or control. They were hunting ghosts in the machine. First target confirmed, Mike reported from his position near the hospital's backup generator. Found their hardware tap. It's military grade, but they installed it like amateurs, overconfident. James watched his tactical display as points of light appeared across the town map, each one representing a piece of the shadow infrastructure they'd discovered. Reynolds, status on the Port Authority? 2 teams in position, she replied. Knox has their attention focused on a false security breach at the main gate. They don't know we're accessing their submarine communications array. The pieces were falling into place. For all their technological superiority, their mysterious opponents had made a classic military mistake. They'd forgotten that every piece of equipment, every system, required human beings to maintain it. Tommy, how's our little surprise coming? Ready to execute? Tommy's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. Used my sister's restaurant Wi-Fi to piggyback into their command and control network. They're so busy watching for external threats, they never secured their own systems. James allowed himself a grim smile. While the enemy had focused on building their shadow infrastructure, his team had been setting up a trap of their own. Every compromised system, every backdoor, every piece of their network was about to become a liability. Suddenly, Thorne's voice cut through their comms. Clever veterans, playing with technology. But did you really think we wouldn't see you coming? The town's power grid fluctuated, emergency systems activating randomly. A show of force, demonstrating their control. You're right, James replied calmly. We wanted you to see us, just like you wanted me to investigate the vandalism. The difference is, we learned from your playbook. He gave the signal. Across Oak Harbor, veterans who'd been positioned for hours began their coordinated assault, not with guns or explosives, but with specialized equipment that targeted the Shadow Network's weakest points. What are you doing? Thorne's voice carried the first hint of concern. Showing you the difference between theory and experience, James answered. You built an impressive system, but you staffed it with thugs and contractors. We're staffed with people who've actually fought ghost networks. The effects started small. Traffic cameras stopped responding to Shadow Network commands. Hospital systems began displaying incorrect data. The submarine communication array suddenly broadcasted its location to every law enforcement agency in range. 6 minutes to total system failure, Mike reported with professional satisfaction. Stop this, the cultured voice from earlier demanded, all amusement gone. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Actually, we do, James countered. You're using Oak Harbor as a test bed for something bigger, creating chaos to justify your takeover. Classic insurgency tactics, we've seen it before. Through his scope, James watched Storm Raiders scrambling to respond, their military training falling apart as systems failed unpredictably. Webb emerged from the command center, barking orders that couldn't be executed as communications went dark. You're playing with forces beyond your understanding, the voice warned. We're not just changing systems, we're changing the world. No, James replied. You're trying to break the world so you can rebuild it in your image. But you forgot something important about the systems you're trying to replace. And what's that? They're defended by people who've sworn oaths to protect them, people who've bled for them. James nodded to Tommy, who executed the final phase of their plan. People who know that technology is just a tool. The human element is what matters. Across Oak Harbor, every compromised system simultaneously displayed the same message. Shadow Network compromised. Federal investigation in progress. Impossible, the voice sputtered. Our security? was designed by people who've never had to fight for real, James finished. Never had to adapt when plans fall apart. Never learned that the best technology in the world doesn't matter if you don't understand the human factor. Through his scope, James watched the shadow network collapse. Each piece of their carefully constructed infrastructure became a beacon, broadcasting its location and purpose to federal authorities. The submarines that had seemed so threatening now appeared on every radar screen in the Great Lakes. But as sirens began approaching from all directions, James knew this wasn't over. Because somewhere in Oak Harbor, Axel Reaper Thorne was about to demonstrate just how dangerous a cornered animal could be. And the Storm Raiders were about to remind everyone that technology wasn't the only weapon in their arsenal. The Storm Raiders' response was as swift as it was violent. With their shadow network exposed, they reverted to what they knew best: brute force. Dozens of bikes roared through Oak Harbor streets, their riders now openly carrying military-grade weapons. They weren't trying to hide anymore. Multiple explosions at power substations, Reynolds reported urgently. They're trying to force a blackout to cover their retreat. They're not retreating, James corrected, watching through his tactical scope as Storm Raiders took up defensive positions around key infrastructure points. They're consolidating, making sure they can destroy everything if they can't control it. Thorne's voice crackled over emergency frequencies. Last chance, James. Walk away now, or we burn everything down, starting with that Veterans Center you care so much about. Through his scope, James watched Webb directing Storm Raiders into combat formations. The military contractor had dropped all pretense of subtlety, now openly coordinating what looked like a war zone deployment. He's not bluffing, Mike reported from his position, picking up multiple thermal signatures. They've rigged demolition charges throughout the industrial district. Let me guess, James replied grimly. Focused on data centers, communication hubs, anything that could preserve evidence of their operation. Correct. They're going to erase everything, physically. James watched as more Storm Raiders arrived, their bikes modified for combat. They weren't just thugs playing soldier anymore. They were a private army backed into a corner. Reynolds, status on federal response? 20 minutes out, minimum. They're scrambling everything they've got, but we don't have 20 minutes, James finished. Because he could see what was happening. The Storm Raiders weren't just placing charges. They were establishing a kill zone around the harbor. Anyone trying to enter Oak Harbor would face a prepared defensive position. The cultured voice returned, now hard with barely contained rage. You've forced our hand, Mr. Miller. What happens next is on you. When emergency services fail, when hospitals lose power, when the entire town's infrastructure collapses, remember you chose this. But James was already moving, his mind racing through combat scenarios he'd hoped never to use on American soil. Tommy, execute Protocol Echo. Mike, trigger the hospital backup systems. Knox, flood the port emergency channels with the data package. His team acknowledged as years of military training kicked in. Because while the Storm Raiders had been preparing for a tactical retreat, James's veterans had been setting up something else entirely. What are you doing? Thorne demanded as emergency lights began activating across town, not the main power grid, but independent systems James's team had quietly prepared. Showing you what real veterans can do, James replied. You built your shadow network on our infrastructure, tapped into our systems, thought you controlled everything. But we've been fighting wars in the shadows while you were still learning to ride bikes. Across Oak Harbor, carefully positioned veterans began their counter-operation. Not with guns or bombs, but with something more powerful, knowledge of how the town's real infrastructure worked. Hospital generators kicked in, but not the compromised ones the Storm Raiders had rigged. Backup systems installed by Mike's team days ago. Port Authority communications switched to emergency frequencies that couldn't be jammed. Traffic systems reverted to manual control, operated by veterans who'd trained for this scenario. Impressive, Webb's voice cut in, but futile. You're still outnumbered and outgunned. Are we? James watched as his plan unfolded. Because while the Storm Raiders had been focused on controlling technology, they'd missed something crucial. They'd missed the people, police officers who'd stayed quiet, watching their corrupted colleagues, port workers who'd documented every suspicious shipment, hospital staff who'd kept separate records, regular citizens who'd seen what was happening to their town. All of them now moved with purpose, following plans James's team had quietly put in place. Not fighting, organizing, protecting what mattered. "You don't get it, do you?" James addressed both Thorne and their mysterious employer. "You thought control meant having the best technology, the most firepower. But real control, real power, it comes from the people you thought didn't matter." Through his scope, James watched as the Storm Raiders' defensive positions began to crumble, not from federal forces or tactical teams, but from the inside out, as their carefully constructed operation fell apart in the face of organized civilian resistance. But in the harbor, something was happening that made James's blood run cold. Because Axel Reaper Thorne wasn't retreating with his men. He was heading for the nuclear material they'd detected earlier, and his expression said he had nothing left to lose. The marina's security lighting cast harsh shadows as James tracked Thorne's movement toward the concealed nuclear storage site. The Storm Raiders' leader had abandoned his tactical gear, reverting to his leather cut. A final statement of identity as everything crumbled around him. "He's heading for Storage Unit 7. Knox's voice crackled through the comm. "That's where they've been keeping the material. Radiation signatures are spiking. Looks like the containment's been compromised." "How bad?" James asked, already moving through back alleys and maintenance corridors, using routes mapped out during his earlier surveillance. "Bad enough to make half the harbor uninhabitable if he breaches it completely," Reynolds replied, "and he's got enough explosives to do just that." Through gaps in the buildings, James caught glimpses of chaos. Storm Raiders scattered in different directions, their military discipline shattered. Webb was nowhere to be seen. The professional contractor had apparently abandoned his troops when the operation collapsed. "Your employers have abandoned you, Thorne," James broadcast on an open channel. "Webb's gone. Your shadow network is exposed. It's over." Thorne's laugh was hollow through the radio. "Over." This was never about the Storm Raiders, James. Never about one town or one operation. We were just the test run, proving what's possible. A pause then. "But if we're going down, we're taking Oak Harbor's future with us." James reached the marina's edge, staying in cover as he assessed the situation. Thorne had barricaded himself inside the storage unit, but something was wrong with his movements. Jerky, uncertain, like a man operating on the edge of control. "He's been exposed," Mike reported, monitoring medical data. "Radiation levels in his system are critical. He's not thinking straight." "Or he's thinking more clearly than ever," James replied, recognizing the look of a man with nothing left to lose. He'd seen it before, in war zones where desperation drove people to unthinkable acts. Thorne's voice came again, weaker but still defiant. "You know what I realized, James? All that talk about the old world dying, about inevitable change. They were right, but not the way they thought." Coughing, then, "Sometimes you have to burn everything down to make people see the truth." James moved closer, using techniques perfected in urban combat to stay undetected. He could see Thorne now, through a gap in the storage unit's door. The Storm Raiders' leader was slumped against a reinforced container, his skin showing signs of severe radiation exposure. "And what truth is that?" James kept him talking, signaling his team to get into position. "That all of this, the laws, the borders, the whole system, it's all an illusion. Push hard enough and everything breaks." Thorne's laugh turned into a cough. "They used us, James. The bikers, the contractors, all of us. We were just their test subjects, proving you could turn anyone into a weapon." James was 10 meters away now, close enough to see the detonator in Thorne's trembling hand. "Who are they, Thorne? Who's really behind this?" "Does it matter? They're everywhere and nowhere. Banks, corporations, governments, all just fronts for people who decided the old rules don't apply anymore." Another cough, worse than before. "But we can send them a message. Show them what happens when you push too hard. By destroying innocent lives? This isn't sending a message, Thorn. This is giving them exactly what they want: chaos, fear, an excuse to tighten their control. James was close enough now to see Thorn's eyes, fever bright, but still calculating. The man might be dying, but he hadn't lost his tactical mind. "You think you've won," Thorn said quietly. "Exposed their operation, saved your precious town. But this was just the rehearsal, James. They're already moving on to the next phase, the next town, the next group of disposable soldiers." "Then help me stop them," James urged. "Give me something to work with. Names, locations, anything." Thorn's finger tightened on the detonator. "Too late for that. But I can give them something they don't expect. Show them what happens when you push loyal soldiers too far." James had a split second to react as Thorn's thumb moved. Years of combat training took over as he launched himself forward, using a technique perfected in close quarters combat. But as he crashed through the storage unit's door, he realized this fight would be decided by more than just skill. It would come down to who had more left to lose: a dying man seeking revenge, or a veteran fighting for everything he'd sworn to protect. Time slowed as James crashed through the storage unit door. His combat training broke the next seconds into a series of critical moments. Thorn's thumb on the detonator, squeezing. The radiation warning sensors blinking red. The sound of his own heartbeat drowning out the chaos outside. James's shoulder connected with Thorn's chest, driving them both away from the nuclear material. The detonator flew from Thorn's grip, skittering across the concrete floor. But the Storm Raiders' leader wasn't finished. Despite his radiation sickness, he fought with desperate strength. "You don't understand," Thorn gasped, landing a solid blow to James's ribs. "They're already inside everything. Banks, governments, military, all compromised. Oak Harbor was just proving it could be done anywhere." James absorbed the hit, using Thorn's momentum against him. "Who are they? Give me something real." "Look at the shipping manifests," Thorn coughed, blood staining his lips. "The same shell companies, different names, all leading back to people too powerful to touch. We weren't building a criminal empire, we were building their infrastructure." Through his earpiece, Reynolds' voice was urgent. "James, radiation levels are critical. The containment's failing." But James couldn't retreat, because Thorn was crawling toward the detonator, his movements driven by something beyond pain or survival. James launched himself forward, using a grappling technique learned in close-quarters combat training. "Your own people sold you out," James growled, fighting for control. "Webb, your employers, they left you here to die." "They left us all to die," Thorn laughed bitterly. "The whole operation, it was a test run, seeing how far they could push before someone pushed back." His eyes were fever bright. "But they didn't expect you. Didn't expect veterans to still believe in something worth fighting for." James got Thorn in a hold, but the Storm Raiders' leader had one last card to play. From his cut, he pulled a small device, not the main detonator, but something equally dangerous. "Dead man switch," Thorn wheezed. "Let me go, or the charges around town go off anyway. How many people die then, hero?" Through his earpiece, Mike's voice was tense. "He's not bluffing. Multiple charges just armed across the industrial district." James maintained his hold, mind racing through options. In his ear, Reynolds was coordinating containment teams, evacuations, trying to minimize the potential damage. But Thorn wasn't done talking. "Want to know the real joke?" Blood stained his teeth as he smiled. "The nuclear material, it's not even weapons grade, just dangerous enough to cause panic, to justify whoever comes in to restore order. Classic false flag." His laugh turned into a racking cough. "We were just the trial run, proving how easy it is to turn a town against itself." James's mind raced, connecting pieces even as he fought to maintain control. The shell companies, the infrastructure takeover, the military precision. It wasn't just about smuggling or control. They're preparing for something bigger, he realized, creating chaos to justify taking control. And the Storm Raiders were just their dress rehearsal, Thorn finished. seeing if they could turn common thugs into a private army. Guess we passed the test. His grip tightened on the dead man's switch. But they never figured on real soldiers getting involved. Never thought anyone would fight back. Time seemed to freeze as James made his decision. Because while Thorne was focused on the switch in his hand, he'd missed something crucial. Something James had learned in countless close-quarter combat situations. Sometimes the obvious threat isn't the real danger. James moved with explosive force, not trying to take the switch, instead targeting a pressure point that would trigger an involuntary muscle response. Thorne's hand spasmed, but he didn't drop the switch. Instead, James completed the move by directing Thorne's arm up and out, using the man's own resistance against him. The switch remained clutched in his grip, but now it was pointed away from any receivers that could trigger the charges. "Clever," Thorne gasped. "But you're too late. They're already moving to the next phase. Next town, next test run." His eyes were growing unfocused. "You can't stop what's coming." "Maybe not," James acknowledged, maintaining the hold. "But I can stop what's happening here, and I can make sure people know what to look for next time." As containment teams rushed in, as the nuclear material was secured, as the last pieces of the Storm Raiders' operation crumbled, Thorne whispered something that would haunt James for months to come. "There won't be a next time, hero. Because next time, they won't bother with rehearsals." Dawn broke over Oak Harbor as federal teams secured the last of the Storm Raiders' operation. James stood at the Veterans Center, watching as agents cataloged evidence from the Shadow Network. His restored Mustang sat in the parking lot, a final gift from Reynolds, who'd insisted on having it repaired using seized assets. "Final counts in," Reynolds reported, joining him at the window. 37 Storm Raiders in custody. Webb's body was found at the Canadian border. Looks like his employers tied up loose ends. Thorne's being treated for radiation exposure under heavy guard. "And the nuclear material?" "Contained. You were right, it wasn't weapons grade, just dangerous enough to create panic if they'd released it." She paused. "But we found something else. Documents, encrypted data, things they didn't have time to destroy. This goes deeper than we thought." James nodded, studying the map they'd created. Red pins marked cities where similar motorcycle clubs had suddenly turned professional. Blue pins showed compromised infrastructure points. The pattern was clear and terrifying. "They were building a network," he said quietly. "Not just for smuggling or crime. They were proving they could take over anywhere, turn anyone into their private army. The question is who?" Tommy joined them, still coordinating with other veterans who'd helped expose the operation. Thorne mentioned powerful people, shell companies. "We'll probably never know," James replied. "Not the real ones behind it, but we know their playbook now. Know what to watch for." Mike entered with a laptop displaying data streams. Already seeing similar patterns in other border towns. Motorcycle clubs getting military-grade equipment, infrastructure being quietly compromised. They're not stopping. "No," James agreed. "But neither are we." The Veterans Center had become something more than a support hub. Veterans from across the region were reaching out, sharing information, watching for signs they now knew to recognize. The Shadow Network had wanted to prove how easily they could turn a town against itself. Instead, they'd awakened something else, a network of people who'd sworn oaths to protect their communities, who knew how to fight the shadows. "Found something else you should see," Reynolds said, handing him a file. "Those shell companies Thorne mentioned? They're already setting up in other towns. Different names, same patterns." "Then we'll be ready," James replied. "Because they made a crucial mistake in Oak Harbor. They thought technology and force were enough. Forgot about the human element." Through the window, he watched Oak Harbor coming back to life. Not just surviving, but stronger. People who'd looked away from the Storm Raiders now watched their streets more carefully. The Port Authority had new security protocols. The hospital had better safeguards. "They'll try again," Reynolds warned. "Different tactics, different towns. And they'll find veterans waiting," James responded. "People who fought real wars, who know the difference between looking strong and being strong. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. For a moment, he tensed, remembering similar messages from before. But this was different. "Another town," he said, showing Reynolds the message. Veterans there noticed motorcycle clubs suddenly getting organized, infrastructure starting to show signs of compromise. "Here we go again," Tommy said grimly, but James allowed himself a small smile. Because while the Shadow Network had proven they could turn criminals into soldiers, they'd awakened real warriors in response. Across the country, veterans were watching now, sharing information, protecting their communities. His Mustang's keys felt heavy in his pocket, a reminder of how this had started. One act of vandalism that exposed a conspiracy, one veteran who refused to look away. "Ready to get back to work?" Reynolds asked, already knowing the answer. James looked at his team, veterans who'd proven that oaths didn't expire, that some things were worth fighting for. The Shadow Network had wanted to prove the system could be broken. Instead, they'd shown exactly why it was worth defending. "They thought they could take over anywhere," he said quietly. "Time to prove them wrong. One town at a time." As federal agents continued gathering evidence, as Oak Harbor rebuilt stronger than before, as veterans across the country began watching more carefully, James knew this wasn't really an ending. It was just the beginning of a different kind of war. One fought in the shadows, between those who wanted to break the system and those who'd sworn to protect it. And this time, the protectors were ready. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.